In this video, we will take a look at how to create a multilingual term base within SDL MultiTerm. Basically, MultiTerm is a very powerful tool to create your own customized version of your own terminology, no matter whether it's at corporate level or at LSP, translation provider level, or at the individual freelance translators level. Anyone in the translation supply chain can create their own terminology as required, and obviously then pass this terminology on along the supply chain so that you can make sure that the terms that you define are used across the entire supply chain that works with terminology, both in terminology management itself as well as translation. So let's get started right away. So in my example, I assume that I will create a term base with 4 languages and some additional fields that I would like to use. To get started, you go to the File menu and click Create Term Base. And then basically MultiTerm prompts you for the name of the term base that you would like to use. I can say my first term base here. You can see that the term base will be put into a particular location and under my documents, SDL MultiTerm. Obviously you can select any location, just remember where you put it so that later then you will find it back first of all, and then you can also use it both within MultiTerm obviously, but also in SDL Charter Studio, for example. So I will call it my first term base. Then the term base wizard appears and allows me to get started. A few steps that I need to take obviously to define the fields and how to get started with everything. So I say next, and this is actually a quite nice dialog box here, because rather than creating a term base definition from scratch where I then have to painstakingly define all the languages or the text fields or the other fields that I might want, I can use a predefined term base template for my work. And you can see a number of templates that are shipped with MultiTerm. For example, bilingual glossary, which is very simplistic, and you basically just enter source and target terms, maybe quite nice for use with Studio. Multilingual term base is the one we will pick, but you also have term lifecycle management within here, which is quite interesting because it allows you to model the lifecycle of terminology from start to finish. But in my case, I will use multilingual term base. And this basically just means that I have a nice template that gets me started faster than creating from scratch. I can also use other options here, but let's just keep this for the time being. I say next. I give a name, my first term base. I could give a description, copyright. I can even add graphics that will be shown as for identifying the term base, even an icon and PDF document with maybe instructions for use. Obviously in my case I want to keep it simple, so I just say my first term base. Then I get prompted with the language fields. So obviously the most important field category that you will add to your term base is language fields. And in this multilingual template I already have 3 languages that are offered to me by default: German, English, French. Maybe if I also want to work with Japanese, I could add it here, and maybe even Spanish. Then I can basically also add that like this. And so then I can make sure that I have all the languages that I want to use. Obviously later I can add new languages to the term base as required at a later point. What is also quite nice is that I can select the language field label that should be used. So if you prefer to have local names like Deutsch for German, then you would be able to add this here. You can also use any other code that you would like to use. In my case, again, I just want to keep the defaults. Then I click Next. And here, basically, I then can define all the descriptive fields that should describe the terms that I will enter in the various languages. What is quite nice in this template is that quite a few typical terminology fields have already been added for me, so that again I don't have to start from scratch. However, you might not like some of the names here, and why then not basically say that you want to rename them maybe? So why say grammatical gender when gender is enough? Same for number. So if it's a singular or plural form of a term, part of speech I can probably keep. If I wanted to change, for example, what's in the subject field, then I can click Properties. And this then allows me to add new categories here to the subject field. So I could, for example, say maybe I have some automotive terms. Then I would add this category. Maybe I have also some IT terms which I want to use. So I can basically add all the subject meta fields that I would like to use to my term base. Click OK, and then later this is possible to use. The node field obviously is just a text field then, where I can enter free form text at a later point in time when I start using the term base. So you have these field types. So you have basically the pick list field type, which gives you a fixed list to keep consistency. So you will always say it's IT and not sometimes information technology and sometimes something else. You would like to always use IT, so that's then the name you use, and that's then fixed for the term base that you're using. So let's assume that I'm happy with this choice. Obviously, if I wanted to have more fields, I could add them here, so that's possible. But let's assume I'm just happy with this. Just want to rename this final one as well, because again, register is not really needed. So I say next. And this then now is a very important step for the future use of your term base. Here, basically, you can decide where each field should reside within the structure of a terminology entry. So if you follow the proper terminology usage, then what you typically have is a few entry-level fields that are at the top of your entry that describe all the languages in the entry. Typically, the subject field at the very top of the entry, applies to the entire entry in all languages. So an IT term obviously is an IT term in all the languages. You might also want to have a general node that describes the entire entry. You might want to enter a source here at the global level, at the entry level. And also you might want to have a status information. Is this still a work in progress term, or has it been well defined? So you can then use this field to model this. What is very nice in MultiTerm is that the entry level fields can also appear under the language level, so the index level, or at the term level, which makes it very flexible for you to enter nodes that describe terms at all these levels according to the case that you might have, right? So it's very important that you are able to put the information into the entry at the location that you wanted to, and you always have a very nice way of working then with these different levels to describe the different terminological data that you're using. So let's assume I would like to add the usage field here. In order to do that, what is important first of all is that you decide where this should be. So if I want to have it under each term, for example, then I would first select the term level, then I say add, and then the usage field appears here. If I don't want to have it as the first field, I can also drag it down here, and then it comes at the end of the fields. You don't have to fill in all the fields either. Again, it's a very flexible way of putting the terminology information, the additional information that describes a term, at the level that you want it to appear. So let's assume I'm done with the entry level structure then as well. Then I can click next, and then my term base basically gets created, and I can start using it. So it's already open as well. So why don't we get started right away and create our own very first entry in this new term base that we've just created. So to add a new entry, it's easy. Here in the editing group, simply click add new, and then MultiTerm opens an empty version of the entry, obviously, and now I can start going through and entering the information. So for example, if I've got a subject matter that I would like to add, I could say, okay, it's an IT term. So you might remember that earlier in the video we created these subject fields. Obviously, if there's new subject matters in your term base, then you can add them at any point in time by editing the definition of the term base. So here then in English, let's double click on this field here. So by double clicking, I can basically open the fields. I can press enter to then put the term into this entry. And then I can continue by tabbing also, so I don't have to use the mouse. I can also use the keyboard for this. So let's complete this by saying imprimante photo, maybe for French. Let's assume I don't have the Japanese, Spanish terms at this point. That doesn't matter. I can come back later and edit. So now the basic words are all in the entry, but let's assume I would like to add some additional information. So for example, let's assume I've got a synonym for Fotodrucker in the old German spelling. Then I could enter it like this, Fotodrucker. Then obviously I might want to say, hey, that's not the best spelling, but sometimes it still occurs. So then I could say in a note, this is the old spelling, don't use. And then you could also say, maybe just to make sure that it's really clear, as a status you can say it is a deprecated term. Yeah, so all this information can be added nicely to MultiTerm in a very flexible way. You can enter any number of synonyms with the same meaning to the same overall term, and basically in this way really provide very rich information around the terminology that you want to capture. Let's assume I'm done for the time being. Then I can simply click Save up here, and then the term gets saved, and I can see now also that it starts being available in my terminology list that I might be working with. So you could continue now like this, and what you can also do at any point in time is you can go in and edit again. So let's assume I get a graphic that I would like to show along with the term. So then I could say edit at any point in time, and then up here select a graphic from my system and basically say save. And then the picture gets shown as well, which is also obviously very nice, because then you can make sure that you can have visual representation of the terms you are working with as well. So let's assume that this is my first entry that I would like to use, and I would now continue adding new terms. In the next step we will then take a look at, when you have a bigger term base, what you can do with it in terms of searching and finding terms back, and also then in a different video how to use this from within SDL Studio.